So if someone wants to understand what strategies can they learn if the employer is hesitant to provide sponsorship initially, so that employer can have COS. So technically they could provide you, but they are not probably agreeing to provide that candidate. Are there any strategies of how they can convince to sponsor? It's, I think, again goes back to showing your unique value proposition is what I believe.
Yeah, but I think, one thing that's often overlooked in terms of sponsorship is employee retention. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier in the video, but it's not so easy for someone who's on a sponsored job just to sort of chop and change, unless they're like super high skilled, right, and super sought after. But particularly like students or graduates, obviously you're at a stage in your career where you don't necessarily have that luxury. You don't have that sort of traction in your career. So one thing I would emphasize is that when you're sponsoring somebody, there's a much higher chance that they're going to be sticking with the company for the longer run, because obviously their legal stay, their legal permission in the UK is connected to that job, for better or worse.
That's true.
But also that particular time that they're spending on the visa is counting towards permanent residence, which is essentially, it changes the course of history for generations if you really think about it, because somebody becomes British or gets ILR,
Correct.
they have children, it can change the entire course of someone's life. So
Agreed.
that said, obviously all of those things play into the fact that someone is going to be much more loyal in a job that's sponsored.
So actually that I have a follow-up question. So what happens if someone has been laid off from their work, i.e. their work visa?
Yeah.
What should be done next?
Yeah, so if you've been laid off, really unfortunate. Obviously, it's so much harder if you're on a visa. So what you'll need to do is just make sure that you're liaising with your employer. It's important to know when they notify the Home Office. So are they going to notify the Home Office, on your last day of employment, or are you being put on gardening leave to try and give you a bit of grace to get your things together? That will obviously help you plan moving forward. Now, legally speaking, even if your employment's ended, if you've been laid off, until you receive notice in writing that your visa's being cut short, technically speaking, you are still here legally in the UK. Now, unfortunately, according to the rules, there's not much that you can do in terms of work while you're sort of in that limbo stage. But of course, what you can do is you can be looking around for other sponsored jobs. Sometimes there can be a delay in receiving the letter, which can give you a bit more grace. You need to make sure that your contact details are up to date with UKVI, just to make sure you don't miss an email or miss a letter, because that's very important. And what can happen is, if you're traveling as well during that period, if you were to receive that notice in writing while you are outside the UK, that means your visa will be cancelled immediately. You won't be able to come back in. So one thing I'd recommend is just be extra careful if you're thinking or needing to travel during that particular time period. You might not have gotten your letter yet. You might be okay, but it's a bit of a risk if you leave the UK, because you might get that notification and then all of a sudden you can't come back. So just be very careful. Yeah.
It's a risky affair. My final question is for all the entrepreneurial spirit folks in our community. What if someone wants to start a business in the UK?
Yeah, so there's two primary ways that you can start a business in the UK as a vehicle for your visa, right? So as a way of being able to live and work here. So the first one's the Innovator Founder Visa, and that's an endorsement-based visa. So what that means is that the government have entrusted a small amount of endorsing bodies to vet applications for the visa on its behalf. So a big part of that application is a solid business plan. There's 3 main criteria that you need to hit though. It's a very specific visa. So you need to prove the business is innovative. You need to prove the business is viable. So can it get off the ground? Can it survive? you need to prove that the business is scalable. So can you get it up and running and start turning profit relatively quickly in real terms? Okay. What we find is that the criteria for that visa is quite specific. So many well-meaning business entrepreneurs or founders who still want to do a business may not always qualify for this visa. So another option is the so-called self-sponsor arrangement. So for this particular visa, you need to set up a company and you need to have somebody on board who can effectively either be a business partner or work with you in the business, who's generally speaking has British or ILR. Then basically you would go about incorporating the company and applying for a sponsorship license, and then assigning yourself a COS and applying for the visa.
What would be the cost investment for the second route approximately?
That's a really good question. There's really nothing in black and white. So there's a section in the rules which states that obviously the company needs to show that they can afford to pay the salary of the skilled worker. So that's one of the most key parts, is that eligibility for the skilled worker visa is dependent on being regularly paid the salary that is stipulated on the COS. Okay. So while there's nothing in writing, it's a bit subjective. As a new company, obviously you don't have the luxury of trading history. You don't have previous tax returns that show you scaling. So what else can you do? Well, you can look at things like business planning, providing a solid financial projection. You might want to, have a cash infusion as part of that. But really, any sort of figure or any number just needs to be explained in a solid business plan.
Got it.
You might also have contracts. You might also have clients in the pipeline who are basically signing to pay you a certain amount of money to the company. These are other sort of evidences that you can use to prove that your company is sustainable and can get off the ground.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam. By the way, folks, Adam writes amazing content on everything immigration and international job seeking on LinkedIn. So do follow him on LinkedIn. You will get daily dose of amazing content. Thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you.